Imagine, if you will, building this incredibly wealthy, high-tech European economic miracle.
Right.
You've got gigabit internet, this highly educated workforce, universal banking, and like millions of international tourists pouring billions into your economy every single year.
It sounds like a utopia.
It does. But now imagine powering every single bit of that futuristic, hyper-connected society with a massive, dirty diesel generator sitting right in your backyard.
Oh, wow.
A generator you have to, buy fuel for from your neighbors across the sea at literally whatever price they demand that day.
It is a staggering paradox, honestly. You have the ultimate 21st century service economy completely tethered to the most fragile, vulnerable 20th century energy model you could possibly imagine.
And that exact paradox is what we are unpacking today in our deep dive. So for you, our listener, who sent us this absolutely incredible, rigorous presentation.
15 pages of pure, dense data.
Yeah, exactly. The outline is titled Cyprus Macro Socioeconomic Evolution and Sustainable Development Assessment, 1960 to 2024. And I just have to say, right off the bat, I so appreciate the visual restraint you used here.
Oh, absolutely. The design choices are fascinating.
Right. You didn't give us any of that corporate marketing fluff or, like, distorted 3D pie charts. It is a purely objective, data-driven framework.
Which is exactly what we need for this kind of macroeconomic analysis.
Yes. You strictly use these minimalist white backgrounds, these really low saturation Morandi and gray bleed tones. And I love that you insisted on pure 2D flat infographics. No 3D clutter anywhere.
Well, it forces us to strip away the noise, doesn't it? We're just looking directly at the structural realities of a nation.
Yeah, exactly. The geometric wireframes on that title slide just set the perfect tone.
Because we aren't just looking at random stats here. We are doing a complete socioeconomic MRI of an island nation over, 6 decades?
6 decades, yeah. From 1960 to 2024.
Right. So we are tracking Cyprus from its emergence as a newly independent state, navigating explosive economic growth, some deeply concerning demographic shifts, rapid digital adoption, and, right up to the existential challenges of its energy grid and governance.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on your second slide, your executive summary, you split the page into these 4 elegant, light gray wireframe matrix blocks.
Economy, population, technology, and environment.
Exactly. And if we look at the trajectory of human wealth in that first block, the sheer mathematical slope is just hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
You included this beautiful 2D smooth area chart on slide 3. There's a dark blue solid line for GDP per capita filled with light blue underneath. And in 1960, the GDP per capita was a very modest $976.
Less than $1,000 a year.
Right. You actually circled the start and end points with these red dashed circles, which I love. Because recently, that per capita figure has shattered the $35,730 mark.
It's a totally different universe.
Oh.
You have to remember, in 1960, they were a newly independent, primarily agrarian economy.
So farming mostly.
Yeah, they exported carob, potatoes, some raw minerals. The baseline was incredibly low, and they were really trying to find their footing in a highly volatile post-colonial Mediterranean landscape.
Right. But then you follow that trend line with the upward trend arrow you added, and it just pushes relentlessly upward. That isn't just growth. It's a geometric leap into the high-income tier.
Well, but, a leap like that doesn't just happen because of good weather.
No, absolutely not.
And if we look at the underlying structural milestones in your data files, we see 2 massive anchors that fundamentally rewired the Cypriot economy.
Right, the European pivot.
Exactly. The first is accession to the European Union in 2004. Now, we often talk about EU accession as this great political victory, but macroeconomically, it is a brutal transformative process.
How so? Because, from the outside, it just looks like signing a treaty and suddenly getting access to a bigger market, like joining a big club.
Oh, it is so much more invasive than that. To align with the European framework, Cyprus had to systematically dismantle domestic monopolies. They had to completely overhaul their tariff structures.
Wow, so a total teardown.
Pretty much. They had to implement rigorous European standards across every single sector. We're talking everything from food safety to banking transparency. You are essentially taking a local legacy operating system and forcefully upgrading it to a continental enterprise system.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It requires immense institutional pain, yes, but the trade-off is that it completely de-risks the country for foreign investors.
And that de-risking leads directly to the second anchor, right? The monetary pivot in 2008 when they adopted the euro.
Precisely.
You actually highlight the irrevocable conversion rate in the notes locked in at 1 euro to 0.58527 for Cyprus pounds.
That highly specific number is so important. That is the exact moment Cyprus permanently tethered its economic fate to the stability of the Eurozone.
Because they eliminated exchange rate risk.
Exactly. By doing that, they created an environment that practically begged for foreign direct investment. You no longer had to worry about the local currency suddenly devaluing if you parked your capital in Nicosia.
It's like watching a local mom-and-pop shop successfully navigate the absolute nightmare of going public, franchising globally, and becoming a huge conglomerate over 60 years.
That's a great analogy.
And they did this while dodging incredible geopolitical and economic shrapnel. I mean, think about the timeline. The oil shocks of the 70s,
Right.
the dot-com bubble, the 2008 global financial crisis, the recent pandemic.
It requires a relentless focus on comparative advantage. Cyprus realized very quickly that due to its physical size and its lack of raw materials, it could never compete on a massive industrial scale.
They couldn't be the factory floor of Europe.
Right, so they competed on location, on their legal framework, on services, and on European integration. They built a sophisticated, high-income service hub.
But, an economic engine, that powerful one that turns a $900 agrarian baseline into a $36,000 powerhouse, it doesn't run on policy alone.
No, it needs fuel.
It requires a massive physical influx of capital.
Yeah.
And for Cyprus, the data on slide 4 is unequivocal about what that sector is.
The tourism industry. It is the absolute macroeconomic anchor.
The scale of it is wild. You visualize this with a really stark minimalist vertical bar chart. Gray for the early years, dark blue for the recent peaks.
Which really highlights the contrast.
It really does. We are looking at recent high water marks hitting $3.49 billion in international tourism receipts. And the sheer volume of humanity arrivals have surged to over 4 million visitors annually.
4 million.
On an island with a domestic population of just over 1 million.
Think about the logistical marvel that requires. You are temporarily increasing the population of your country by a multiple of 4 every single year.
It's hard to even picture that.
You have to scale your water treatment, your electrical grid, your waste management, and your transport infrastructure just to handle this massive seasonal influx of consumers. And these are consumers who demand high European standards.
And the financial plumbing of that is staggering. 4 million people bring in nearly $3.5 billion.
What's fascinating here is that tourism isn't just a luxury sector for Cyprus. It's not just a nice-to-have. The data clearly shows these receipts making up a massive chunk of the country's total exports.
Right.
This continuous influx of foreign capital perpetually stabilizes their foreign exchange reserves, and more importantly, it creates a massive employment multiplier effect.
The hotels, the restaurants, the tours.
All of it. The transport logistics, the retail, the food supply chains. A huge percentage of the domestic population is directly or indirectly tied to servicing this influx.
Okay, I have to push back here, though.
Sure.
Because when I look at an economy that relies that heavily on external foot traffic, I don't just see a powerful engine. I see an incredibly exposed flank.
Yeah.
Well, if a global shock hits, say, a pandemic completely shuts down global aviation, or a major geopolitical conflict erupts in neighboring regions and people just stop flying, doesn't the entire Cypriot economic engine just stall out?
It's a fair question.
Aren't they dangerously vulnerable to things entirely outside their control?
That is a highly astute challenge, and yes, the vulnerability is absolutely real. If you look closely at the data during 2020 or during major regional conflicts, the dips in revenue are sharp and brutal.
They just fall off a cliff.
But here is the mechanism that has protected them. The compounding effect of 50 good years.
The wealth reservoir.
Precisely. Historically, the sheer volume of this repeat revenue has allowed Cyprus to build an incredible reservoir of wealth capital.
So they have savings to fall back on.
Yes. A bad year for tourism hurts deeply, of course. But they have built up enough sovereign and private wealth, funded so much domestic infrastructure, and raised the baseline standard of living so high that the economy actually has the shock absorbers to survive short-term demand collapses.
Oh, I see. So the real threat isn't a temporary drop in tourists.
No, the underlying structural threat to this entire economic model isn't about whether the tourists will show up. It's about who is going to serve them when they do.
Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Who is going to manage the hotels, drive the logistics networks, and run the IT systems for this massive service economy?
Which brings us perfectly to slides 5 and 6, the most terrifyingly quiet crisis in this entire data set, the demographic inversion.
We often talk in economics about black swan events, unpredictable, catastrophic shocks, but what we're looking at here is a classic gray rhino.
A gray rhino, a highly probable high-impact threat that is slowly charging right at you.
In broad daylight.
And yet, institutions often freeze instead of getting out of the way.
hmm
For Cyprus, the demographic data you charted forms a perfect, terrifying X.
The visual is
You
chilling.
use this dual-axis line chart, you got
Right.
the crude birth rate from 1960, shown as a stepped, dark gray downward line, and it just plummets.
A total collapse.
It drops from a robust 24.67 birth per thousand people all the way down to a staggering low of 10.79. It more than halved. You even put a thick downward-pointing arrow to show the drop.
The generation replacement rate is fundamentally broken.
And at the exact same time, you had this solid red line pushing upwards, tracking the population aged 65 and above. It surges from a manageable 5.3% to a massive 14.61%. You even add a little gray magnifying glass icon where it crosses the 14% mark.
The demographic dividend that fueled their early economic miracle, a large cohort of young, working-age people, has completely vanished.
I look at this data, and it feels like we are looking at a seesaw where the weights are shifting incredibly fast.
That's exactly what it is.
You have fewer and fewer young people pushing up on one side to generate labor, productivity, and tax revenue. And on the other side, you have a rapidly growing, much heavier senior population sitting down, requiring care, pensions, and medical infrastructure.
And let's extrapolate what that means on the ground. When your crude birth rate drops to 10.79, you are no longer naturally replacing your workforce.
Right.
For a massive service economy, that is an existential bottleneck. It means soaring healthcare costs because an aging population requires exponentially more medical intervention per capita.
Of course.
It means an immense, prolonged strain on the national pension system as a shrinking pool of workers tries to fend the retirements of a booming senior class.
And connecting it back to the tourism engine, you simply cannot host 4 million tourists with high-end service expectations if you don't have the working-age population to staff the infrastructure.
The engine is starving for its most basic component, people.
Now, normally, a European country facing this would just import labor, right?
Yeah.
Mass immigration.
They would, but Cyprus is an island. The friction of importing, housing, and integrating hundreds of thousands of workers is significantly higher than for a country on the continental mainland.
That makes sense.
So when a country runs out of quantity in its labor force, it has absolutely no choice but to urgently and drastically increase the quality and the participation rate of the people who are already there.
You have to make every single existing worker exponentially more productive.
Exactly. You have to execute a relentless human capital strategy.
Which Cyprus clearly did, because slide 7 is a massive bright spot. The data on educational attainment.
It's phenomenal.
You used this flat stacked bar chart, and you drew this striking dark cyan box around the bachelor's degree segment.
To really draw the eye.
Yeah, and the percentage of the population aged 25 and over with at least a bachelor's degree has leaped from 24% to 34.7%.
Over a third of the adult population holds a university degree.
And primary school enrollment has been practically locked at 98 to 99% for years.
Yeah.
They're leaving no one behind educationally.
That educational foundation is the mandatory prerequisite for pivoting an economy. You cannot transition from low-wage agricultural or basic hospitality jobs into high-valued, knowledge-based sectors without a heavily credentialed workforce.
Like financial services or advanced IT.
Precisely, you need highly educated people for those roles.
But, degrees alone don't solve a labor shortage if half your population isn't fully participating in the economy.
No, they don't.
And this is where slide 8 reveals what might be the most profound cultural and macroeconomic shift in the entire 60-year timeline: the rise of the female workforce.
It is a staggering transformation.
I absolutely love the chart you chose for this. A pure dumbbell chart or a slope graph using just neutral gray lines. Very objective, but the data points are almost hard to believe.
The numbers speak for themselves.
It tracks women's share of employment in senior and middle management. Back in the early days of this data set, it was an abysmal 1.4%.
Just think about that for a second.
I am. Picture a corporate boardroom or the senior management team of a massive hotel chain. Out of 100 managers, statistically, only one is a woman.
Right.
But then, fast forward to the recent data, that number has skyrocketed to 27.5%. Over a quarter of middle and senior management are women.
And we have to look at the underlying mechanisms that allowed that to happen. You don't get a jump from 1.4% to 27.5% just by hoping society becomes more progressive.
Wait, exactly. Because going from 1 to 27% in a traditionally patriarchal Mediterranean culture doesn't just happen because of a sudden social awakening. How did they actually achieve that? Was it like EU quotas?
Well, the EU harmonization certainly played a major role in mandating corporate transparency and anti-discrimination frameworks. But the true enabler was financial inclusion.
Oh, interesting.
If you look at the broader banking data, account ownership at financial institutions is practically universal in Cyprus, now sitting around 96 to 98% for both men and women.
So just having your own bank account. Financial autonomy.
Precisely. When women have direct access to capital, credit, and independent financial identities, it unlocks female entrepreneurship.
It changes the whole power dynamic.
It does. It allows them to start businesses, manage corporate budgets, and ascend to leadership roles without institutional friction. But beyond the mechanics of banking and EU mandates, we have to look at the macroeconomic imperative.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you might look at that 27.5% female management figure and just celebrate it as a great victory for social equality.
And it certainly is that.
It is. But when you overlay it with the demographic collapse we just talked about, that gray rhino, it reveals something much deeper. This wasn't just progressive policy. It was an absolute macroeconomic survival tactic.
It had to be. When your birth rate is halving and your domestic workforce is shrinking, you cannot afford to leave half of your population out of the economic decision-making process.
That's just bad math.
Terrible math. By aggressively bringing women into senior management, ensuring they have high educational attainment, and giving them total financial inclusion, Cyprus effectively doubled the brain power and leadership capacity of its available workforce.
They offset the labor shortage by unlocking the other half of the population.
An educated, financially empowered, gender-inclusive workforce is the exact recipe required to transition an economy from basic, manual labor into a modern, resilient, knowledge-based society.
It is a profound evolution of the nation's DNA.
Truly.
But a highly educated, highly capable workforce demands modern tools to actually generate wealth. I mean, you can have all the brain capital in the world, but if they're using typewriters, the economy doesn't grow.
No, you need the infrastructure.
Which brings us to slide 9, the island's digital revolution.
And the digital data shows a textbook S-curve of adoption.
It really does. You drew this sleek, black, S-shaped growth curve, and you added this dashed box right over the steepest part to label the rapid popularization phase.
It perfectly captures the momentum.
Internet penetration started at practically statistical zero, around 0.05% in the early days. And then it hits that steep upward trajectory, tearing past the 91.2% mark.
The digital infrastructure is phenomenal. Cyprus is fully connected. They have laid the physical foundation for a digital economy, which perfectly matches the high educational attainment of their workforce we just discussed.
You have smart people, and you give them fast tools.
Exactly.
But then, the data takes a highly surprising turn on slide 12. We hit this massive innovation bottleneck.
Ah, yes. The high-tech exports.
You've got this trend line chart, and you mark the highest point with a little hollow circle and an annotation. High-tech exports as a percentage of manufactured exports peaked at an already modest 3.2%.
Right.
But since then, it has slid back down, hovering around a mere 1.0%.
I'm genuinely confused by this discrepancy.
It throws a lot of people off. Let me get this straight. We have a highly educated population, nearly a third with degrees. We have a newly empowered management class. We have blazing fast internet covering the whole island.
Yes.
Why are our actual high-tech exports dropping to 1%? Why aren't they building the next great European hardware? Is it purely physical?
It is almost entirely physical, and your confusion highlights the exact difference between a digital service economy and a physical manufacturing economy.
Okay, break that down for me.
Cyprus has successfully transformed itself into a massive consumer of digital technology and a very strong hub for online services, things like fintech, forex trading platforms, maritime software management.
So intangible things.
Exactly. But it struggles immensely to be a persistent producer or exporter of physical high-tech goods.
Because you can't email a microchip.
Bingo. To export physical high-tech goods, whether that's robotics, advanced electronics, or specialized medical devices, you need deep, highly integrated, just-in-time physical supply chains.
Like they have in mainland Europe or Asia.
Yes. You need specialized plastics, rare earth metals, and cheap, massive-scale shipping. An island geography imposes a massive logistics tax on physical goods. It is cost prohibitive compared to the mainland.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Therefore, their high-tech manufacturing base is incredibly exposed to external supply chain shocks. The drop from 3.2% to 1% tells us that their physical industrial upgrading is still in a very volatile trial phase. Their true comparative strength lies in the intangible economy, not in factories.
Speaking of the physical limitations of being an island, let's return to the paradox we started this show with.
The energy grid.
How do you actually power all these computers, all these five-star hotels, all these university campuses? Because the energy data you provided on slide 10 honestly made my jaw drop.
It is arguably the most alarming set of indicators in the entire 60-year dataset.
You use this spark line chart. It's just a flat line across the top, and you drew a stark, dark gray warning circle around this massive section. For decades, literally decades, the percentage of electricity production from oil sources was locked at a flat, unforgiving 100%.
100%.
100%. Only in the most recent data points has it crept down to 79.4%. I couldn't believe my eyes. A modern European nation running 100% on oil.
In environmental economics, there is a concept known as carbon lock-in.
Right, where infrastructure and behavior are so entrenched in fossil fuels that transitioning seems impossible. But why is it so extreme in Cyprus? Mainland European countries have had mixed grids for decades: nuclear, hydro, coal, gas. Why was Cyprus locked at a monolithic 100% oil?
Because of the extreme isolation of an island grid.
Right, they can't just plug into a neighbor.
Exactly. Mainland countries can share power across borders. If France overproduces nuclear energy, Germany can buy it. Cyprus has no electrical interconnectors to the mainland. After independence, they built out an electrical grid based entirely on the cheapest, most readily transportable fuel available at the time: heavy fuel oil and diesel shipped in on tankers.
And once that's built,
Once you build your entire national grid, your power plants, and your transmission lines around heavy fuel oil, the capital cost to rip that out and replace it is astronomical.
so they built their entire economic miracle, the $35,000 GDP per capita, the 4 million tourists, the digital networks on a grid that was totally dependent on imported, highly pollutive fossil fuels.
And the vulnerability there isn't just environmental, it is aggressively economic.
How so?
When you rely 100% or even 79.4% on imported oil to keep the lights on, you are completely at the mercy of global energy markets.
Oh, right, because you don't control the price.
Exactly. If a geopolitical conflict chokes supply lines and oil prices spike, your entire economic miracle takes the hit. The profit margins of those luxury hotels vanish because their air conditioning costs quadruple.
And the cost of living for everyday citizens just skyrockets.
It is a profound structural threat to national economic security.
But slide 11 does show a spark of hope. The renewable dawn.
It does. Fine.
You visualize this with a really clean, minimalist line chart. Mostly white space, but then this dark green line suddenly starts climbing.
The solar breakthrough.
Yeah. For decades, renewable energy, excluding hydro, since Cyprus doesn't have the rivers for it, sat at an absolute flat 0%. 0%. And then suddenly, it shoots up. You put a solid upward arrow to highlight it. A sharp, undeniable spike to 15.13%.
Breaking from 0 to 15% is historically the hardest part of any national energy transition.
Really, getting off zero is the hardest.
Absolutely. It requires overcoming immense institutional inertia. You have to change the legal frameworks for grid connection, you have to incentivize private solar installation with feed-in tariffs, and you have to convince a highly skeptical public.
And the EU pressure must have been immense.
It's massive. The EU's green directives heavily penalize high carbon grids. That 15% surge is primarily driven by solar technology, which, frankly, it makes perfect sense for one of the sunniest islands in the Mediterranean.
Seriously.
It represents a true inflection point. They have finally shattered the 100% carbon lock-in.
The trajectory is set.
Yes, but we must emphasize, for Cyprus, getting that green line from 15% to 50% or 80% is not just an environmental luxury. It is an urgent existential matter of economic survival. They have to stop bleeding their wealth capital to buy imported oil.
Okay, we have covered an incredible amount of ground. From a $900 agrarian baseline to a $35,000 digital service economy.
An incredible leap.
From 24 births per thousand down to a collapsing 10. From 1% female management to 27%. And from 100% oil to a 15% solar breakout. It all culminates in slide 14, the macro radar evaluation.
This is the synthesis of the entire 60-year journey.
And the visual here is stunning. You drew a 2D pure wireframe radar chart. No fill colors, just thick black lines connecting 5 dimensions. Wealth, education, demographic pressure, carbon dependency, and governance.
It's a very revealing shape.
The shape is incredibly skewed. You have these massive, strong outward pushes on wealth and education. The human and financial capital is world-class.
Unquestionable.
But then the shape collapses completely inward on demographics due to the aging crisis and on carbon dependency. But the most striking anomaly, the dip that really caught my attention on slide 13, is governance.
It is the deepest warning in the data set.
You used an inverted or upside-down bar chart for this. Light gray background, dark gray bars. It tracks the control of corruption percentile rankings, and it's just falling.
It's a significant slide.
You noted, with a downward arrow, that Cyprus dropped from being in the top 7.6 percentile globally all the way down to the 62.7 percentile. There's a massive slide down the global rankings for institutional transparency.
And this is where all the threads we've discussed tie into a very tight, very tense knot.
Why is governance sliding?
Often, when a nation rapidly transitions into a high-wealth financial and service hub, the sheer velocity of capital flowing through the system simply outpaces the regulatory frameworks. We've seen controversies around investment programs and financial oversight.
So what does this all mean? Why does this specific slide in transparency matter so much right now?
Because good governance and strong, transparent institutions are the absolute bedrock of trust. And Cyprus desperately needs trust right now.
For the transition.
Exactly. They need massive foreign direct investment to fund that urgent energy transition we just talked about. Building national solar grids and upgrading grid storage costs billions.
And they can't fund it entirely themselves.
Right. Furthermore, they need a rock-solid, internationally trusted financial system to support their aging population and their pension funds. If global governance and corruption rankings continue to fall, it threatens the trust of the international investors they completely rely on. Institutional resilience is facing its greatest test.
Okay, so looking at your final slide, slide 15, the strategic outlook. You summarize this perfectly in a 3-part infographic panel. No extra decoration, just clean, neutral text and simple icons.
It's a very clear roadmap.
First, Cyprus must lean heavily into its strengths. Leverage that 34% degree holding, digitally connected, increasingly female-led workforce to deepen modern, high-value intangible services.
Except that you won't build physical microchips, but you can absolutely build the fintech software that runs the companies making them.
Exactly. Second, it must violently accelerate the energy transition. Breaking that 79% oil dependency isn't about looking good on global climate reports. It is an impenetrable shield for the domestic economy against global volatility.
It's an economic mandate.
And third, they have to rebuild institutional transparency. They have to reverse that corruption slide to attract the capital needed to survive the demographic winter that has already arrived.
It is a profound, incredibly challenging roadmap. But as the 60 years of data clearly shows, Cyprus has a track record of navigating structural shifts that would break lesser economies.
This data framework you provided paints a masterpiece of a nation transforming itself against incredible odds. It shows a towering economic achievement, but it bravely and objectively highlights the deep cracks in the foundation that need immediate repair.
It forces us to look reality in the eye, and frankly, it leaves us with a fascinating, almost science fiction-like scenario to consider.
What's that?
Well, as advanced island nations like Cyprus achieve near total digital saturation, but simultaneously face a collapsing birth rate and the urgent need to rebuild their entire physical energy grid, will the successful nation state of the future function less like a traditional country and more like a highly managed, ecologically green corporate campus.
A corporate campus.
Yeah. A campus entirely reliant on importing global talent and highly optimized digital systems just to keep the lights on and the engine running.
A sovereign nation operating as a massive, high-tech corporate campus. That is a wild, lingering thought. For you listening, please keep digging into the data. Look at the World Bank files, question the trend lines, interrogate the mechanisms, and remember that the most vital insights, the stories that define our macroeconomic future, always live just beneath the surface of the charts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.